Hi everybody, this is Theorol. I'm kind of a rules guy, but here on YouTube I've got a lot of playthrough videos, and as I've mentioned in those, I've been thinking about doing some non-playthrough content. So to kick that off, I thought it would be nice to do a tier list. So my tier list's a little different. I don't have already defined tiers. Rather, what I want to do with this is to essentially take these heroes and put them into tiers that are distinct. And so as I go through this, I'm not looking to say this hero is S tier and this hero is A tier, but rather this hero and this hero seem substantively different. I'm looking for the gaps, and the gaps are where we're going to put our tiers. So this tier list is based on power level. I'm looking at the power level of heroes, not like how fun they are to play or how great they are thematically or anything like that. This is strictly about how easy the game is to win when they're involved. In order to substantiate that, I've been playing Marvel Champions for several years. I've played hundreds of games, and I've played all of these heroes probably at half a dozen times each. So that's kind of the basis for where I'm rating them, is based on my experience and what I've had happen to me in games that they were involved in over the last few years. Now that does mean that what's happened with these heroes over the years, they've changed and grown, and still sometimes those early games are going to be part of what determines how I rate them. Iron Man and Spider-Man and She-Hulk have been around for a long time, and I've played them in a lot of times. I played them back in Core Set only. I played them recently with as recently as Sinister Motives, or even more recently than that. So there's a lot of things that go into this rating, but ultimately it's about my experience, and as part of my experience I have particular playstyles. If you've watched any of my videos, you're maybe aware that I don't run more than 6 heroes at a time, or 6 allies at a time in a deck. So that's going to color my view of certain ally-focused heroes that might show up. And I value resilience a lot because I don't chump block a lot. I don't really love chump blocking as a mechanic. I still use it, obviously. I mean, it's part of how you can win the game, but it's not what I'm seeking for. I'm not like, ooh, this ally's great at chumping, I'm so happy. I'm like, oh man, that's unfortunate. I really wish they would stop printing those cards. So anyways, that's all kind of going in here to determine this. Some of the more recent heroes I haven't played as often, so they will be a little bit shakier in where they place. I'm not going to do any next evolution stuff because I haven't done that yet. I will go through the heroes in release order according to how they come out of Hitch's tabletop, so that's the basis behind this ordering. Alright, so to start with, we're going to start with the core set, starting with Iron Man. Iron Man is a build hero. Once he is built, he has the effectiveness of like 2 heroes at once. He has efficient events, very efficient. He has solid boosted economy once he's built as well. His main struggle is that he has to build to get there, and that means that those first couple turns can be a little rocky. Sure, you can build him with extra tech cards, and I highly recommend doing so, which can get him online rather quickly, but they don't get him online immediately, and they certainly don't get him to his full power immediately. And as long as he's building, he's not yet reached that point where he's so outperforming. Nonetheless, his potential is so amazing that he still earns a spot here in his tier, which is kind of at the top of what I would say is a mid-tier area. Alright. Next up is She-Hulk. So She-Hulk can do damage, and she has a lot of damage ability. She hits hard, and she can hit it consistently. She does struggle, though, with her 4 hand size, which can limit what her options are. She likes to flip in order to get her 6 hand size when she goes to Alter Ego, but that results in threat. Now she has threat mitigation. She has thwarting she can do in Alter Ego, but thwarting in Alter Ego is primarily a mitigation tactic, not a thwarting tactic. And that means that she can struggle to really thwart when she needs to. She can struggle to bring threat down rather than keep threat from going up too fast. And that can cause a lot of challenge with side schemes in particular. She's very dependent on allies to give her that. She doesn't have anything in her kit, or otherwise aspect cards. Additionally, her damage is a little susceptible to being exhausted, and so that can keep her from using her ready, for instance, that she has in kit. She can get very high attack values these days, since the 1.5 ruling with superhuman strength, and that gives her a lot of potential. But ultimately, between that and the 14 hit point cards, she can perform, but she's still somewhere in the lower end of mid tier, and Iron Man and She-Hulk kind of frame that, what a mid tier hero is in my mind. Next up, we have Captain Marvel. So Captain Marvel has great economy. She has card draw and alter ego. She has a triple resource, which gives her the ability to do a lot more with her cards than many heroes can. And that's great, but her cards themselves aren't super efficient. They're fine. They're a decent level of efficiency, but they fall behind some heroes' cards. And they are inefficient enough that she can very easily lean into her aspect cards to really get the most out of them. She's resilient. She can heal every turn, and being able to heal is stronger than just having the hit points. She has effectively more hit points than She-Hulk, because as long as the game's more than 3 turns long, she will have had more than 15 hit points just staying in hero form. Of course, she doesn't recover for quite as much, but anyways, the point being that she can hold her own, and she also has the ability to filter through that healing, which allows her to get rid of her worst cards and find better cards, which is a wonderful thing to be able to do. It can also give her additional resource advantage, as sometimes you'll filter into a double resource. In the end, she lands up here in the high tier, somewhere above all of our mid tier heroes. Next up, we've got Spider-Man. So Spider-Man, like Captain Marvel, has good resources. He gets to draw a card in hero form whenever the villain attacks, which is solid. And he can struggle also, similarly, because of his cards in his kit not being super effective, or being quite expensive for what they give. And in the end, he can also lean into his aspect cards, but he has a lot more resiliency than Captain Marvel. Unfortunately, he's trading some of that kind of baseline, like the 2 thwart, or just having a playable thwart card in his kit. His is good, but it requires very specific circumstances to be useful. So in the end, he lands here, defining the middle of the mid tier. Then we have Black Panther. Black Panther has solid all-around ability, 2/2/2 to start with. His Black Panther upgrades let him do pretty much everything with Wakanda Forever. The main challenge he runs into is that when you play those Black Panther upgrades, they don't do anything. He can, once they're all out, he can heal, he can damage, he can thwart. He has double resources in his kit, which can give him some economic advantage over other heroes, but not hugely. And not enough to make up for those Black Panther upgrades needing to be played and then do nothing. Unless you play Wakanda Forever, in which case you're paying 5 resources for something that's not great. He only needs 1 Black Panther upgrade to make Wakanda Forever decent, but it's also a challenge, I think, because those additional upgrades don't turn it from decent to great and greater and greater. They turn it from decent to a little bit better. There's such incremental changes that it can be a challenge to really get all of his Black Panther upgrades down, in which case you're working with a fairly okay event instead of a great event and a lot of dead cards. So it's just a tricky thing to balance for him, and it leaves him also here in the mid tier. So that's our core set, mostly mid, with Captain Marvel kind of standing out. As we get into Wave 1, we start with Captain America. So Captain America has an amazing baseline with his 2/2/2 and his ability to discard to ready, which gives him solid power to for what he can do in a turn. When he does more than that in a turn, it's because he's doing some really powerful things. So he's got his 6 damage and stun, so he has statuses, he has damage, he has thwarting. He can really do pretty much whatever you need him to do. His main weakness, I would say, is just that he doesn't have anything that's like super broken. He doesn't do things that are so amazing that they just break the game. He's just like, he is the solidest hero who can just do whatever needs done. In the end, he lands in the high tier, which becomes the captain tier. Next up, we have Miss Marvel. So Miss Marvel can do very impressive things with her events, especially once she's built up. Just being able to return an event to her hand isn't really that impressive, but once she has all of her build cards down, she can maximize them, especially multi-target events where she can double dip in her growth or shrink. She has alter ego supports, which can help her to build. She needs to flip for those, but she has enough thwarting for her events that that's mostly okay. The place where she struggles is that 1/1/1 stat line is not giving her anything to work with. She needs events to do anything on the board. And if you don't draw the right event, then you can't do what needs to get done, and that can be a challenge sometimes. If you don't draw her thwart event, then you can't thwart. And if you haven't built Shrink yet, then her thwart event isn't very efficient yet. So she's kind of like Iron Man in that she struggles because she needs to build, but she's also not necessarily as effective as Iron Man once she's built, and she's not kind of shielded from some of the needs that she runs into. So when she's just not getting the events she needs, she's really struggling. In the end, she lands to me here in this lower mid tier, which is not an indictment against her. She-Hulk is very good at this stage in the game, so I think she's doing fine. Next up, we've got Black Widow. So Black Widow is a very strong stabilizing hero with her ability to get up to 3 defense with a ready and canceling boosts. She can just get to a point where she has really solid control over the game. She can thwart, she can confuse the villain, which allows her to flip to alter ego so that she can get her card draw for preparations, which makes them fairly efficient. They're okay as they are, but they really become good when she's in alter ego and when she can play with them with her gauntlets. So in the end, Black Widow is a hero with solid ability. She can struggle, solid baseline, but she can struggle a bit with really having an immediate effect because of how much of her is built into the preparations. Her events aren't super efficient. They're not bad. They're just not great. And in the end, that can leave her struggling a little bit to make a difference. To close out a game, she's just a very control hero. And in the end, I have that put her in the mid tier. Next up, we've got Thor. So Thor can do some damage as just kind of his baseline, but he has a great economy when he's drawing cards from engaging minions. The challenge that he has is that his great economy is made up for by how inefficient his cards are. His cards do not deal with things very efficiently overall, and that means that the fact that he has a small hand size, if he's not getting minions, that can pile in on him and make him very, very ineffective. Nonetheless, he can build to be a fairly powerful hero, and in spite of that need for build, he can still kind of make it to there because he's got the hit points to make it to that point, and he's got the attack to kind of maintain control as long as thwart's not the main thing. And even when it is, he has a thwarting card. It's not a bad card, as long as the minions aren't too powerful. When he's has to deal with extremely powerful minions, or when he just doesn't draw minions, then he can really struggle. Nonetheless, I would say he's a hero that can perform up at these levels when he's doing really well, and he can go down to these levels when he's not, but I leave him in this lower mid tier as kind of an average of what he can achieve. Next up, we have Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange has amazing economy. Every time he plays an invocation, it's like he had an extra card in his deck, in his hand, and so if he manages to play 2 or 3 invocations in a turn, it's like he had a hand that was 2 or 3 cards bigger than just the 5 hand size that he starts with. Some of his invocations even draw him extra cards to make him even more efficient. If they're not drawing him cards, they're playing out statuses for extremely good efficiency again. His invocations are so efficient, and he can just cheat with them. He doesn't even have to follow the rules because they're not attacks and they're not thwarts. They just, do their effects. I mean, it's not cheating, but it's the way that he just works around all of the mechanics of the game to not be hindered at all. They're not events. He doesn't pay for them. He doesn't play them, rather, so all of those things don't affect them also. In the end, Doctor Strange ends up well up here in the stratosphere, a whole tier level higher than anybody else. Next up, we have Hulk. Hulk is just the opposite of Doctor Strange. He has attack, he has damage, and that's all he can do. He has no statuses, he has no way to control the game, he cannot thwart. He has one thwart card, and it's super inefficient, especially for a hero card. It's less efficient than most aspect cards. It's just ridiculous. He has a small hand size. He has a little bit of resource in his triple, but his small hand size is so far beyond that. He has no ability to try and combo his cards together, and he needs to because that's like half of what he does. It's such a strange build that requires so many things to come together for him to work effectively. All he does is damage, and he doesn't even do that if he gets exhausted, if he gets stunned, if he has anything go wrong. He's a very, he has his... I've had games where it's like, okay, cool, next turn I can Hulk smash, and then it's like, oh, you had to discard a card. Well, guess I can't do anything then. I mean, he's just so fragile to anything the villain throws to stop him. And that's a terrible place for a character called Hulk to be. He ends up down here about a tier level below anybody else. All right, so after wave 1, we're looking at this kind of crazy spread that'll slowly fill in and be a little bit more reasonable as we go. So next up, we've got Hawkeye. Hawkeye has not super efficient events. His arrows, I thought, were really efficient when we first saw him, but since he's come out and I look at his events these days, I look at them and I say, wow, those aren't that great. I mean, they're not bad, but the fact that he has to spend an extra super special resource that is his bow to play them means that they should be like good, not just okay. And that's, I would say, Hawkeye's biggest problem. His events are just kind of okay. He needs resources and he doesn't have them. He can get resilience by playing Mockingbird over and over again, but that's super expensive, 4 resources every time you do that. Can't even shoot an arrow unless you have built for it, unless you have his expert marksman and a quiver down. You're not shooting an arrow when you're recurring Mockingbird. So he struggles. He needs to build, but he doesn't have really great efficiency to make up for it. He starts the game essentially with a 5-card hand because of the bow, and it doesn't pay for itself. It just is like a necessary thing to be able to play his hero events. No other hero has to go through the hoops that Hawkeye has to go through to do what Hawkeye can do. Anyone can do it more effectively, basically, except for, Hulk. So he ends up down here in this low tier between the bad Hulk and the good Hulk. All right. Next up, we've got Spider-Woman. So Spider-Woman, as opposed to Hawkeye, she has pretty efficient events. About as efficient as Hawkeye's, except for she doesn't need a bow to do them, and they give her plus stats. She also has a more efficient status effect, and she has the ability to get tough and heal and be resilient, whereas Hawkeye needs Mockingbird to do that. Spider-Woman, I would say her main issue is just that she doesn't have great resources. She can struggle to play multiple aspect cards per turn, which means she struggles to get her stats boosted, which is fine. You don't have to build her to boost stats, and really, in a lot of ways, her most powerful ability is that she gets to choose 2 aspects when she's deck building, and so can create combos that nobody else can create. And if you combine those well, she can do things that no one else can do, which is pretty impressive. Her base stats are still decent, even if you only get out 1 card. Preferably you get to play 2 of them and then get 3/3/3 stats, which are good. in the end, she's a very good, solid hero, and ends up here in the high tier alongside the captains. All right, next up we've got Ant-Man. So Ant-Man has a lot of ping ability. He can remove a single threat, of single damage, and when it's working out, you can just manage to very efficiently take things down and hit exactly what you need to. He has got a good amount of build that he can do, but it's not super necessary. He's already got a pretty strong baseline. One of his strengths is resilience, which primarily comes with his giant form through Pym particles and through his helmet. He can also have a decent economy because of his helmet, because he gets to draw cards when he flips. But the issue is that you have to get his helmet out, and his helmet's kind of expensive to play. Without his helmet, he's still fine. Like, I would say Ant-Man without his helmet is a mid-tier hero, and Ant-Man with his helmet is up here in the high tier, but because you have to play to get there, he ends up somewhere in the middle here. He does have good status cards with his wrist blasters, but they do require very specific resource matches, and I find often I don't have the resources that they need to be able to actually get the advantage out of his status. Alright, next up we have Wasp. So Wasp has pretty solid stats when she's in giant form, and she's got pretty good events, especially when she's in tiny form, which is kind of her split. She has really terrible upgrades, regardless of which form she's in. I mean, her helmet's fine, and her others are bad, but that means she kind of needs to lean into her aspect cards for her build, which is an unfortunate place to be, or basic cards really, because that's where build happens. Because aspect and basic cards aren't the best build cards to begin with, but she can do that, and she works out okay with those cards. But the fact that she can't really be super efficient, that she can't build to be very strong, keeps her from really excelling. I think, she has interesting builds she can do with her giant form, but ultimately she can struggle because of that lack of resources, because of those bad upgrades, and because her events are decently good, but they're not like right home about. So in the end, she's here to me in this kind of lower mid-tier region. Next up we have Quicksilver. So Quicksilver is a 1/1/1 hero, but he has the ability to ready, which gives him a lot of flexibility. He's kind of like a 2/2/2 hero, well, 2/2/1 hero, except for that he can split his thwart and attack, which is novel and cool, but really when he excels is when he gets to boost those stats, and especially when he gets high boosts and uses his always be running to ready several times and bursts down the villain in one turn, which is what Quicksilver tends to accelerate to. His main struggle, I think, is friction resistance. It's an amazing resource, but it's such a strong resource that it can kind of discourage you from building him with other resources, or it can make it so that you need to build so much resource sink that friction resistance doesn't get wasted, and then once you get out friction resistance, everything's fine, except for it's not, because you don't always get it out as quickly as you'd like, and it's a challenge to play. It's very expensive the turn you play it. It's good, but it still creates challenges, and until his stats are boosted, he's not really able to do a ton with his events. He can do a good amount, but it's still it's kind of limited. It's around the level of what Miss Marvel's able to do, right? 4 damage or 4 threat for 2 costs. It's fine, but it's not. It can be a struggle to get everything together that you need for him to be able to build. But once built, he is amazing. And so, in the end, I put him here in this mid-tier. Next up is Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch has Hexbolt, and Hexbolt is so good. For 3 resources, you get 3 effects, which can be 2 damage, 2 threat, a card draw, or a status, and that's all very efficient for what 3 resources can give you. If you could choose between them, it would be brokenly good. As is, she has some amount of randomness to it, which still leaves it being pretty near brokenly good, very, very good. Besides that, she has magic shields, which are solid. She has the ability to discount things to cost 0. She has straight up encounter card cancel. And mostly, though, it's Hexbolt. Mostly Hexbolt is what just elevates her past so many heroes. And she's also a Mystic, like Doctor Strange, and Mystic cards are brokenly good. So in the end, she bridges the gap between the captains and the Doctor. Alright, so that's where we are after Wave 2. We've filled in some gaps and gotten a lot more mid-tier heroes. Now we get into Wave 3, starting with Groot. Oh, Groot. So Groot purportedly is a resilient hero. I mean, obviously he has these growth counters, and those growth counters prevent damage. So that means he's resilient, right? Sort of. That's what he seems to want to be, except for his kit doesn't support that. His kit wants him to use those growth counters to do other things, to be effective with his stats, and to ready and do all these weird things, except for that he doesn't have enough growth counters to do all of those things, even if he's flipping every turn. And he doesn't have enough thwart to flip every turn. And he has these events that really don't want him to spend any growth counters ever, in which case he wouldn't be using them for resilience, and he wouldn't be using them for his upgrades, because he's got to store them up to 10. He's a really weird case where he could be very resilient, but he never wants to take a hit, and that sort of defeats the point of being resilient. Also, not only does he not want to take a hit, he wants to flip to Alter Ego all the time. And at that point, what is your resilience buying you? It's not buying you anything. That's the answer. So he struggles with all of these different ways his kit's pulling him. He can play Justice so that he can flip, so that he can build counters and just never get sort of the baseline value out of them, of damage prevention. But that makes him a very pigeonholed hero and not very effective at anything anyways. I mean, he can hit hard once he's got all his counters built up. But honestly, 2 for 10, I mean, Iron Man can do 2 for 8. And meanwhile, he can also thwart and deal solid damage and have a 7-card hand size. Groot has none of those advantages. He just has a nice, efficient damage card that does a couple more points. You know, okay, you get a 1-point discount on your swinging web kick. It's just, for the amount of investment that it requires, he's just not doing a whole ton with it. So, in the end, he lands down here in the low tier with Hawkeye. Alright, next up we've got Rocket Raccoon. So Rocket Raccoon has great thwart, and he has a ready in his kit for his thwart. He has a +1 thwart in his kit, giving him up to 3 thwart. And yeah, he can do a lot of threat control with his base thwart. He also has weapons that can deal damage. He has some economy in his response. He also has a double resource. He also has this tinkering ability that gives him more card draw. He's got a lot of things going for him. He's even got resilience in Schadenfreude, which is one of the most interesting forms of resilience, because Rocket can be almost dead and then heal up to well past his hit points. If he has some upgrades that boost his hit points, he can fill those up too. And so it's hard because it's a one copy card, and he can't always take damage. He needs people to be able to defend for him in order to just be safe. He's very fragile, and yet he's very resilient at the same time. It's an odd combination. But in the end, he can be very effective. He can do a lot. He can invest into aspect cards to do even more. And he ends up, to me, up here in the upper side of the mid tier. All right, next up is Star-Lord. So Star-Lord is has great economy, as long as encounter cards are not too bad. He also has solid abilities with allies and really a pretty decent baseline, but he wants encounter cards, and it's a very strange position to be in because nobody wants encounter cards. But Star-Lord, somehow he turns them into the ability to close out a game. Solo, he can play Rush very strong, but multiplayer, that can be a bit of a challenge because you can't rush down the multiplayer hit points. Like Quicksilver, he can pull off some amazing bursts towards the end of the game, especially when he's using his ready to get himself more encounter cards, and then using his interrupt to play sliding shots and doing all kinds of damage with it. Ultimately, though, just in terms of course of game, a lot of his value depends on how hard it is to deal with encounter cards. If it's around 3 resources, then his interrupt is good because it's delaying. You're paying forward, which is a good place to be in a game. If it's more than 3 resources, then it's kind of like taking out a loan with interest, which can not be great, especially over time. If it's less than 3 resources, he is extremely strong. In the end, it's not just scenario dependent, it's also luck dependent. Sometimes you just get good encounter cards, and sometimes you get really rough ones. He normalizes that on some level by giving you more encounter cards, but still, a lot depends on, especially early game, what encounter cards you get. So he can sometimes just die and kill everybody at the table. Sometimes he can be extremely strong, but most of the time I would say he's more mid-tier. Alright, next up we have Gamora. So Gamora is like efficiency the hero. She has a very efficient ability that makes all of her events more efficient, and her events are already efficient. I think she makes an excellent contrast for Ms. Marvel. Ms. Marvel builds to get efficient events. Gamora just starts with them being efficient. Ms. Marvel has the terrible base stat line. Gamora has a solid base stat line. And Ms. Marvel's events are themselves inefficient until she's built. Gamora's events start out efficient. And so it leaves her in such a strong position, relatively. And because she uses events, she has some flexibility. She has this deck building ability to have the best attacks and thwarts. She's still susceptible to just not drawing the events she needs, but because of her base stat line, she can still be effective even when she doesn't get the event. That said, she's not super resilient, and often she needs to use her basic defense, which can hinder her ability to use basic thwart and attack. But as long as you're not having to basic defend, she can be good with using her thwart. And otherwise, even when she plays an attack, she still gets to remove threat. And the fact that she's doing both of them means that even if you draw the wrong kinds of events, you can still do some of the right kind of stuff, if that makes sense. So, in the end, Gamora is very solidly here in this upper mid tier. Alright. Next up we have Drax. So Drax needs to get hit. He needs to get up his vengeance counters. Once he has his vengeance counters, he has efficient events. He attacks for a lot. He even has some efficient thwarting cards. Although, like many high attack heroes and high hit point heroes and low hand size heroes, he really can struggle with thwart, and thwart is a weakness for him. That said, he can do a lot of damage, and when he gets Dwight Mastery out, he can draw a lot of cards. I would say the biggest challenge with Drax is in his deck building. He needs to build for resilience because he knows he's going to get hit, but he also, if you need some threat control, he needs to build that into his deck as well. He needs to be resilient and have threat control, and that can be a challenge to manage with Drax. But he can do quite a bit of damage, and it's fairly effective. Still, once he's built, he's not necessarily the strongest of heroes. In many ways, he could land down here in the low tier, dropping out of mid tier, but I feel like he's stronger than those characters. Even though, in some ways, I wonder if he's as strong as these characters, but I think he is. They all struggle with thwart too. They all mostly do damage, and just have the occasional ability to do so, except for, Ms. Marvel and Wasp are here for different reasons, but She-Hulk, Thor, Drax, they're kind of all, I feel like, on par for solid high attack heroes who can do other things but struggle. Alright, next up we have Venom. So Venom has excellent resources. His ability to turn damage into resources is great, or take damage for resources, turn hit points into resources. There we go. He gets out his guns, and once he has his guns out, he's got a solid baseline of ability of what he can do on a given turn. He can do, you know, up to 5 threat removal, up to 5 damage, 6 damage, even spread damage for AoE effects. All in all, very solid baseline just once his weapons are out. Plus, he has very good events. He can stun, he can confuse, he can cancel attacks, and he has Spider Sense available to him, and he has Alter Ego support that can heal him up. I would say he's up here, top tier, excellent hero. His biggest struggle to me is just that sometimes I use his ability too much, and then he has low hit points. So this is actually, I think, really an interesting way for things to have gone. By the end of Wave 3, we've got a very balanced table. The Guardians just kind of fill out the mid-tier and the extremes to make it feel like it's got a nice curve to it, and this is, I think, pretty much the curve that we're going to see even as we continue on. So with that, let's go ahead and break into Wave 4, where things take a bit of a nosedive before Wave 5 can recover it. Alright, but first we start with Spectrum. So Spectrum is a hero that can thwart and attack and defend. She kind of has a 3-3-3 stat line, even though it's a 1-1-1, because of her energy forms. This gives her a very solid ability. Her energy forms also come with pings, which can be very effective, much in the vein of Ant-Man. And she has the aerial trait, which is great because she can play all those cool aerial cards. She doesn't have great economy. She doesn't kind of have a lot of built-in extra resources, but because she has such a strong baseline, that's kind of a form. Or it's not really economy, but it means that she doesn't need to get as much out of her hand because of those pings and because of the high stats that she has, or high basic powers. But the place where she can run into problems, I know a lot of people express that she can run into a challenge where she gets stuck in a form. I don't find that to be a problem necessarily, as much as if she's in the wrong form and she has the wrong event in her hand, there's nothing she can do about it. Her attack event puts her in her attack form. Her thwart event puts her in her thwart form. She's not great at multitasking. She's great at single focused effect. Now, if she's already in a form that she wants to be in and she has an event for what she wants to do, then she can multitask. But in any other case, she's just going to be doubling down or tripling down on a single thing. She can just do damage, or she can just thwart that turn, and that's more the challenge. And I mean, on some level, that is being stuck. If you're in the thwart form and you draw the thwart card, you're still thwarting. But I think it's a particular challenge because her event is also doing the thing that her base stat does. So regardless, still very good stats. The fact that her basic powers are as high as they are, and that she has fairly efficient events, lands her here again in the upper mid tier. Alright, next we have Adam Warlock. So Adam Warlock is a mystic, which means he should be broken, but somehow he's not. Battle Mage is pretty cool. It can dodge a lot of effects, kind of like Doctor Strange's cheats. His events are efficient, which is nice, but he depends on this situation with the 4 aspects, and you have to build an equal number of all of them, and you're stuck with being a Highlander deck where you only have 1 copy of each card. That can create a significant inconsistency where you can't focus in on something. You have to spread yourself out. That's excellent for flexibility. He can do everything, but he can always kind of do everything, and he has a hard time being focused on a single activity if he really wants to do that a lot. Additionally, Battle Mage, while it's not random, it is, because when you max out at like 5 or 6 aspect cards, you often are not drawing the aspect card that you need. You wanted to thwart and you didn't draw a justice card. Well, that means you didn't get any of your cards that are good at thwarting, and you also can't use Battle Mage to thwart. The fact that, again, kind of like in the Spectrum case, it doubles down on what it is, and I understand from a thematic perspective, but from a power perspective, having his Battle Mage abilities double down on what the aspect cards already do can make it tough for him to be very effective. To pile on all of that, he has pretty low stats, which means that he can struggle to be effective when he doesn't draw the cards he needs. That said, having efficient events, also he has recursion from his discard pile, which can give him the ability to tutor the card that he wants when he wants it, but he does have to pay for it. It all together lands him in this mid-tier area. Alright, next up is Nebula. So Nebula, like Black Widow, has the ability to prepare for future turns. The trick is that it's a very short-term preparation. She's going to use it next turn. The advantage she gets out of that is it's much more efficient than Black Widow's preparations. Her techniques are super efficient, so if you can use them on the next turn, they're great. Now, in some ways, that's unfortunate because you can't prepare for what you don't know is coming, but on the other hand, as long as you were able to handle what happened this turn and can play techniques, you are set up to handle what happens next turn. It's not like, I mean, in many ways, you're susceptible to your card draw anyways. It's not like you're choosing between, am I going to set up a thwart technique or a damage technique? How often do you happen to have those two techniques in your hand? It's more just, how many techniques can I play this turn versus how much do I need to do on the board this turn? And then next turn, your techniques go off, and if they hit, it's great and awesome, and if they don't hit, well, that was unfortunate. Now I have to figure out how much can I do this turn and still play techniques for next turn. She does much better in multiplayer games where she can use her cards that let her trigger her techniques on other people's turns, but ultimately she's still pretty effective, just doesn't necessarily stand out, and that leaves her here in this mid-tier. Next up we have War Machine. War Machine does great damage. He does some amazing damage. He has very limited thwart, again with the 1-for-3 that he has to spend special resources to achieve. And he has ammo, and that ammo is it's a limited resource, and he can spend through it a little bit too fast to be able to do everything he needs to do. He has more ways to spend ammo than to make ammo. Because all of his ammo comes from Alter Ego, that means he has to flip. Also, he has one very powerful resilience ability, which is his armored chassis, but again, he only gets it when he flips. And what this leads him to is that place, kind of like Groot, where he's going to be going Alter Ego, and somebody needs to cover his thwart. Because he can't do it, because he's no good at thwarting. But he doesn't have the option to just stay hero mode, because he doesn't have resilience, and he has to get ammo somehow. So, in the end, War Machine lands down here in that low tier. Next up we have Valkyrie. Valkyrie can do one of two things. She can either deal with minions or she can defend. That's basically it. Unfortunately, as you can see from her base powers, she's not very good at either of those things. So she has to build to get competent at them. And then she can only choose one, because she has to put Deathglow on the villain if she's defending, and on a minion if she's going to kill it, or hold it aside so that she can move it to a minion. Her cards are okay efficiency, but they all have extra requirements, like 2-for-5 threat is actually pretty good. But the fact that she has to kill a minion is very limiting, very, very limiting. And that's just the world that Valkyrie lives in. It's not that her cards are bad, it's that she has to kill minions for them to work. And things like Chooser of the Slain that lets her draw a couple cards from putting a minion into play, and then she spends one of those cards to attach Valhalla to it and kill it, means that she didn't get anything out of it. It's so weird. She just she just doesn't have anything that like says, "Oh wow, this is your payoff for being Valkyrie." It's all just kind of like she can build, and then she's a middling hero. Yeah, she can tear up low health minions, but any hero can tear up low health minions pretty effectively. Like that's just not that special, and that's Valkyrie. She doesn't do anything exceptionally well, and even the things that she does well are just okay. She has things that she does very not well, like, thwarting. All right. Next up, we have Vision. So Vision is a very solid hero, very dense, but he can do a lot of damage. He has very efficient events. He can do a lot of thwarting. He has more thwarting cards than any other hero in the game. His main challenge is that when he's intangible, he can't attack and he can't defend, and that can create some weird sequencing. But he gets a card when he goes dense and gives him some economy. He's got the super efficient events. He's got great numbers. He's 2/2/2 in a way. Unfortunately, he can't really take advantage of the 2 damage reduction in intangible in most circumstances unless you build a deck around it. He likes to play Vivian because Vivian's a great ally, and who wouldn't want to play Vivian? She's cool. I mean, everybody wants to play Vivian. They just play a different one. But in the end, he can struggle a little bit with sequencing and just with not being able to be very resilient. He doesn't have a lot of healing, and the 2 damage reduction's not anything to write home about. He can't defend when he's in that form, so he's not able to really double down on that level of resilience. It's just kind of, it's there, and it can help him against minions, but you just kill the minions because you have good damage. Why would you leave them alive? One thing that does bother me a little bit about Vision is that it's a horrible mistheme that he can't attack while intangible. I mean, on some level, I get it, theming, he's intangible, he can't touch anybody, but like in the comics, he's always intangible and fighting people. Like he sticks his arms through people and then they can't move, or grabs their heart. I mean, that's Vision. He fights and attacks things while intangible all the time. So it's weird that he can't do it in the game. Anyways, in the end, he manages to be here in this upper mid tier. All right, that gets us through wave 4, and now we get to start in on wave 5, where things get a lot more fun. So first up for this, we've got Ghost Spider. Ghost Spider has very efficient events, 2 for 6 damage, 2 for 5 threat, very solid. They require her to use her basic activations, but then she gets to ready, and that's great. Her main challenge, I think, is her lack of economy and the fact that everything in her kit practically costs 2. And so just, you have the challenge of 5-card hand size, all of your cards cost 2, you can only play one of them. And that's a limitation. Now, once she gets her braces out, or any other sort of economy, then she can play multiple of them, and then she can use her response twice a turn, and she turns into a very powerful hero. She's great. She still does struggle a little bit, I think, because the bracers give a rebate rather than a discount, and the challenge with a rebate is you just don't know what you're capable of at the start of the turn, and so you can't really plan out what you're going to do as effectively. Nonetheless, she is a solid hero in the same tier as all of these other solid heroes that can carry their own. They don't need nobody, but they do not necessarily cover for other players either. Alright, next up we've got Miles. So Miles has the most efficient events in the game. For 2 cost he can deal 6 damage and stun, and for 2 cost he can remove 4 threat and be tough and confuse an enemy. And that's just bewildering levels of efficiency on his events. He also has web slingers that can let him generate resources and other general just good stuff in his set. It's 1 for 8, it's fine. He's just super efficient. His main problem is that his supports kind of suck. His his dad is got to be one of the worst supports in the game to cost 2, and his friend is fine except for he costs 2, and most people, if they're going to get card draw and alter go, it's going to cost 1. So yeah, it's just those 2 cards. The rest of his kit is good or very good, and I guess he can struggle a little bit because statuses can't stack, so you can only do those really efficient events so many times. I mean, it's almost like if he had to exhaust a special resource to do extremely efficient things. Like, imagine if he had to have a bow that he could only use once a turn, and that did 6 damage and a stun. That would be comparable to only being able to play it once, because you can stun the enemy only once, except for amazingly better. So anyways, yes, top tier hero. He's not strange, but he's good. All right, next up we've got Ironheart. Ironheart is a build hero that builds by getting progress instead of by building cards. She also can build cards though, and they make her even more effective. But in terms of advancing her hand size and her thwart stat, she gets to do that by progress, which she gets for free when she's thwarting things and damaging things and playing cards. It's very strong, and that makes her very strong in terms of being able to just control the board while still advancing her own board state and becoming stronger. And then once she gets to the end game and she can use those progress counters to do damage, she can build up a dozen progress counters and just be like, okay, well, I've got the final stage. It's crazy. So extremely effective end game. Gets to the end game building level very quickly. 6 card hand size once she's there. Sure, she does have to build a little bit, and that can slow her down, but she can also build by the time she's in. She can get to stage 2 in turn 1 at times, if not certainly by turn 2. So very strong hero, top tier. Next up we've got Nova. Nova has a helmet that gives him an extra resource, and he gets to ready it, so that gives him effectively 7 effective resources a turn. With his 5 card hand size, it's solid. His events are efficient when he plays them with wild resources. Not quite Miles level efficiency, but still pretty efficient. His main challenge, I think, is that his effects aren't big, but he can lean into the aspect for big effects, and he has the aerial trait, which means that he has access to honed dive bombs, which are amazing. But even if he didn't have honed technique, I still think dive bomb would be a good card for him, because it allows him to spend all of these resources that he has really ready access to do big effects instead of being stuck with his small effects. And on the one hand, doing lots of small things in a turn is very good, but you kind of run out of things to do, and having big effects allows you to turn all of those cards that you included in your deck for corner case circumstances or to as build cards that you don't need at the moment. It allows you to turn all of those things into high effect abilities, and so having some good solid resource sinks is great, and that is something that Nova can build for, but I think he lands upper mid tier. Unleashed Nova Force also is an amazing card and does great things, but it still doesn't cure the fact that he's mostly doing small things. Alright. Next up we have Spider-Ham. So Spider-Ham, like Venom, gets extra resources from damage, except for he doesn't have to damage himself. He gets it from whatever damage anybody else does to him, and from whatever damage he does to himself with his events as part of a cost. So he negates the cost and turns it into resources. Or doesn't negate it, but he pays the cost and then turns it into more resources that he can use later, which is amazing. He's somewhat resilient. He's not super resilient because he only has 2 damage cancels, but the fact that they land on the table is huge, and means that he can cancel exactly the worst damage, have it stored up. Also, his recovery is very high, and he gets extra resources for recovering, which is crazy. His events are good, and he has pretty high thwart, kind of like Rocket. He's got that 2 base thwart, goes up to 3 in kit, and then he gets a ready. Except for his is on the table, and only costs 1. It's crazy. He has so many crazy effects that he can do that excel, and he can confuse the villain, which lets him go to that alter ego for recovering. He's arguably a little bit above the other top tier heroes. I think he's certainly the best of these top tier heroes, which arguably says that he's in another tier. But he's not, I don't think, quite at Strange's level. And I think there are times when these other heroes can outperform Spider-Ham. If taking small amounts of damage is difficult, he can really struggle. And, you know, he does have limited hit points, and there are times where that's not enough, and he can't get resources because he can't really take the small damage, except for if he gets his cartoon physics, which is, you know, a wonderful card, but he's only got a couple copies. So, also, if you just spend too many of his toon counters, some of his cards aren't very good when he doesn't have extra counters already built up. So, although he has access to a lot of resources, he can struggle if you spend all of them. You need to save a few, and that can make him somewhat challenging to play at times. So, I'm going to just leave him here with those other top tiers and trust that it's good enough. Alright, next we've got Spider. So Spider is an example of a small hand size hero. Doesn't have to be bad. She also has 14 hit points, and she has decent stats. She has a 2 thwart, unlike all of the other small hand size high hit point heroes, and I guess that makes all the difference. It doesn't really. The thing that makes the difference is her upgrades, her interfaces, because they make her in many ways a 4/4/4 hero, which is crazy, with a ready built in. Now she can't just do that 4 and 4 and 4 again, except for when she does All Systems Go, which is an amazing card that she has access to ready all of her interfaces. But being able to do 4 and 2 is already strong. Being able to do 4 thwart and 4 attack as a baseline is crazy. She does have to build to that, but it doesn't take her very long to get built. And really, even with just one interface down, if she can do one of those things for thwart for a turn, it's pretty strong. Once she gets her ready out, she's just doing great. And especially the fact that all of them double as resources, so she can play expensive cards when she needs to. And the thing about having a small hand size, the reason that it's so detrimental is because you don't necessarily get the cards you need. You don't have options. Because she has so many options on the table already, the fact that she has a small hand size isn't very limiting. And that's ultimately what pushes her up here into the, I think, high tier. Yeah, let's say high tier. Okay, so that finishes off through the Spider wave, and I think one thing that people have commented on is that it feels like at some point kind of they're trying to build more to Captain America's level rather than to maybe Spider-Man's level, and I do feel that. I feel like overall heroes are pushing up. The average hero level is getting stronger as we continue to go through the game, and we'll see how that carries on through the X-Men wave, which we'll start now with Colossus. So Colossus is like an improved Groot. He has resilience, and his tough statuses, except for that they're tough statuses, so they absorb all damage. And he can only have 2 of them, but that's fine because one of them absorbs all the damage. He still has 1 left. He spends tough statuses in his kit, but he also gets tough statuses, even while staying hero form. Yeah, he does like to go alter ego so that he can flip up and gain a tough status, but he has ways to dodge the scheming when he's on alter ego. For one thing, he can confuse the villain. For another thing, he has armor up, which allows him to flip back suddenly. He does still struggle a little bit, though, with his thwart, and having low thwart isn't just for scheming villains. It's part of being able to control the game. He does get up to 2 thwart in kit, though, which is a big boost. His main challenge is just that he doesn't have any thwarting cards. So if I think that is one of the things that can happen with Iron Man, where he just he gets to 5 thwart, and then he doesn't have any kit cards to help him exceed that, and that can be a challenge when side schemes have more than 5 threat. For Colossus, he gets to 2, and that's it. For that reason, I think he does pretty well in Justice compared to other aspects, but all aspects have access to some amount of thwarting, and he just needs to build for some of it, because he has damage in kit, no problem. He has resilience in kit, no problem. It's thwarting that he really needs help with. Nonetheless, I think he's very close. He arguably could be a mid-tier hero with 4 Hands Eyes, but I've also seen games where it just is tough to keep tough statuses on him, and when he can't keep tough statuses, when he struggles, he can really struggle, and I think that pushes him down here into this lower mid-tier. With other heroes who have various situations where they struggle. One thing he does have a hard time with, I think, is minions and kind of ping damage, retaliate, those sorts of things. Alright, next up we have Shadowcat. So Shadowcat is amazing. She can defend for infinity, so she is resilient in a way that few other heroes can ever hope to achieve. She has to basic defend for that sometimes, especially if you're not running her in protection, but even then she has a ready in kit to let her use her stats still. That's also an attack, which she needs to play attacks to get back to being phased so she can block all the damage again. She can also has, just straight damage or attack cancels in her kit, and confused statuses. She has a very efficient thwart. She has solid attacks. She has an extra resource on the board from turn 1 that makes her have 6 effective resources, which is crazy. I feel like she lands pretty solidly here in top tier. Next up we have Cyclops. Cyclops is cool because he can multitask. He has 2 thwart and 3 attack that he can kind of do every turn. The problem is he has to pay for that a little bit, and he has to get tactics, which, yes, Alter Ego, he can get tactics, which is great, but he has to play that. It's not just extra resources, or it can be if he's not going in tactics. I think one of Cyclops' greatest strengths is that he can include X-Men allies from any aspect, and that's a strength that I don't take advantage of, which I'm sure has negatively colored my experiences with Cyclops. Nonetheless, he's got some things that he can do. He's got that flexibility built in. He's got a lot of flexibility with which tactic he gets. He has very efficient events, especially when tactics are out, or when he has things he can get from his discard pile. And in the end, I think he lands here in this upper mid-tier. Next up we have Phoenix. So Phoenix has very high thwart to start with, and extra resources, which can be good, but her events start out very inefficient. They are eventually efficient, which is great, but additionally, that 4 extra resources is nice, but they run out and then they're gone. It's a very limited resource compared to heroes like Nova or Spider-Man, who have it unlimited extra resource. Once she goes unrestrained, then her attack gets high and her thwart drops off, but her events become very efficient. She has, however, one of the worst nemesis sets in the game, and that is definitely something. She also has some very bad cards in her kit, whether it's her 2-cost ready or her that can also be a 1-cost save 2 resources, which is to say save 2 resources for later card, or her cancel a minion's activations forever, or even mind control, which is sometimes a really amazing card, but you can draw it dead anytime you don't have a minion on the board, and that can just be terrible. So I don't know, in the end I find a hard time getting Phoenix to perform above kind of this mid-tier. It honestly is a pretty impressive place for her to be with, 5 dead cards in her kit, or 4.5 dead cards in her kit, and the worst nemesis set in the game, or among. Alright, next up we have Wolverine. So Wolverine does damage, and he does it well. He's the best there is at what he does, after all. He can use claws to pay for his attack events, and he just accelerates the game. He can get so much damage on the board so fast. He has good economy as long as he's playing attack events, and he's resilient with his heal 2 every turn, but also because he has healing events in his kit. He's a poster boy for high healing is much stronger than high hit points. He can struggle a little bit because he spends his health so readily, and yet I don't think I've ever seen Wolverine die. It's just ultimately because he can pop back from low hit points so easily. That means that getting to low hit points isn't really a significant problem. I would say his more significant problem might be his kind of lack of control. He doesn't have a lot of ways to avoid damage, and he doesn't have a lot of ways to kind of take control of the scenario. Mostly he just pushes it to an end, pushes it to the win. He does have good thwarting, though. He is part of his efficiency in his events. He doesn't struggle with thwarting. Base 2 thwart, a 3 thwart event that draws 2 cards is great. So I'm going to put him up here in this high tier. Alright, 3 heroes left. Next up we have Storm. So Storm has some cool scaling abilities that she can do with her weather kit. She can give everybody +1 attack, or she can give every enemy -1 attack. And while her weather being able to scale up to the number of heroes is very good in terms of she can get a lot of damage off at once, if it's not damage that you're looking for, it's not that great. Retaliate 1 can be kind of useful when the villain's punching you, but it's terrible to put on the villain. -1 attack can be useful when the villain's punching you, but again, it can hinder you because it makes it hard to kill minions. And Stalwart can be great for players to have, but it also keeps you from stunning or confusing the villain. And all of those other things are things that you need to do sometimes. Retaliate is often the best one when you're not trying to push damage, but it does make just kind of little bits of damage on the villain impossible. But that's okay, because then you can scale up to +1 damage for everybody later, or +1 attack. She has fine events. They work for what they need to do. Her weather also gives her some nice pings that she can do, but she can kind of get stuck in weather or not want to go to a weather because of the other things that come along with the ping. Her upgrades are very good, except for that if you consider the stat part of her upgrades, once they're out, she's a 2/2/2, which she could have just started as a 2/2/2, and those upgrades could actually do something useful. I don't really know why she's only a 1 thwart until she has her crown on, but whatever. They're good. You need to play them so that she can have a decent baseline stat, but she also has her weather that can do stuff. So in the end, I think she's solid upper mid tier. Gambit has some very cool abilities that he can use. He can thwart in Alter Ego. He can deal extra damage with his charge counters, and he can even ready after defending if he takes no damage. And the fact that he has these kind of 3 different ways that he can go with his kit is very interesting. But I do think that he can choose any of them. Like he can defend and be a good defender. He can deal damage and go into aggression and make his attacks amazing. He can go and make other attacks very strong. Or he can go justice and be able to do thwarting also in hero form. Alter Ego only thwarting, as I described with She-Hulk, is a bit of a problem because it's kind of more threat reduction. But because he confuses, that's also that's still very solid. In a multiplayer scenario, it's not as strong as it is in solo because oftentimes you can't necessarily clear something with 3 thwart. You need other people to be contributing so that you can make that happen. You need to be the one to defeat the scheme, and that's not always possible with the way that turns play out. And so in that sense, Alter Ego thwarting can be unfortunate. You can't help somebody else go Alter Ego with it. You have to go Alter Ego to do it, for instance. But that said, if you build into it, I think it's very strong. He can build into thwarting. So he kind of just chooses a strength, but based on whichever strength he chooses, his other abilities are pretty less, right? It's very hard to defend fully if you're not in protection. It's very hard to get any extra damage on your events if you are not aggression. And it's very hard to do effective thwarting if you're not justice. So he struggles to, in my experience, excel at multiple things at once. He just kind of picks one to be good at, and in the end, I feel like the level of good that he gets at it doesn't necessarily push him above mid-tier. Alright, and then finally we have Rogue. Rogue has very solid, efficient events, regardless of who she's touching, really. It's either a 2 for 6, which is good, or it's a 3 for 6 and a stun, which is good, or it's a 3 for 8, which is also good. Like, any of the touching is good, but mostly she wants to be touching the villain so that she can get those statuses out there, and that makes her very strong. She has great resilience as long as she's touching the villain, which basically means she just wants to be touching the villain. The only problem with touching the villain is that her 3 recursion cards are dead, and that's kind of unfortunate, but ultimately the fact that it makes all of the rest of her kit work better means that that's pretty much what she wants to be doing all the time. Just put touched on the villain, ping him with retaliate damage, survive, stun, confuse, and don't worry about what you could possibly do if you went through your discard pile. Energy transfer, meanwhile, is great because it's built-in healing and damage and ready, and it's good, and she's good. I think she has a lot of favorable comparisons to Captain America. 3 for 6 and stun, check. Ability to heal, check. Ability to block all damage, check. Has retaliate in kit, check. So I put her up here personally in the top tier. And that is our tier list. A little bit wonky because of this being not lined up with everything else. There we go. That's our tier list. It ends up with a nice curve around mid-tier. These 3 I consider mid-tier, upper, lower, and mid. This is kind of lower tier, these bottom 5. This is high tier and top tier, and then just strange tier up here all by himself, OP. Broken. But really that's kind of where I feel like heroes have gone. I do feel like in many ways they've begun pushing the base average hero. The average hero used to be more mid-tier, and now it's kind of becoming more upper mid, even verging on high tier. So I think it'll be interesting to see where the next heroes slot into all of this. So anyways, if you enjoyed this, give me a like, subscribe to the channel, check out the playthrough videos for more information about these heroes, and I will see you next time.